Good morning, everyone. My name is Diane English with Parks and Recreation Ontario. We'll just be getting underway in a minute or two. Thank you for your patience while we have everyone logging on. And just a reminder, please, we have a lot of people on the call today. We're expecting over 100 participants. So I know there will be a lot of questions during the webinar. We'll encourage you to write those in the chat box. We'll be copying those questions down and providing written responses to those later following this webinar. It's great to see so many people from across the province attending, and a happy St. Patrick's Day to all.
You are no longer muted. All guests have been muted. You can unmute your line by pressing *6.
Good morning. All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Diane English, and I'm the Director of Research, Policy, and Communications for Parks and Recreation Ontario. Welcome to the very popular webinar on the proposed regulations that will affect the delivery of recreation programs for children under the age of 12. And as I've mentioned a couple of times, we have over 100 people listening in today. So a couple of things to note. Your phone lines are currently muted. Everyone's lines are muted because we have a lot of people. And if you have questions, you can type them into the chat box on the right side of your screen at any time. Because we'll probably have many more questions that we can answer in our time today, PRO will take note of the questions, and following the webinar today, we will provide a written response to these questions. They will be circulated to all webinar attendees and posted on the PRO website, along with this presentation and some other information that PRO is currently working on to help inform stakeholders. So what are our outcomes for today? We have three aims. We're going to try and understand the legislative changes that have already occurred. I'll be explaining those. We'll review at a high level the proposed regulations in the current consultation document that focus on recreation. And you will learn about draft position statements being developed by PRO for a sector response to the Ministry of Education and how you can contribute to the process through a survey. First, a bit of background. The modernization of the Ontario Child Care legislation and regulation began several years ago. When the government introduced its plan for full-day kindergarten, the responsibility for childcare was moved from the Ministry of Children and Youth Services to the Ministry of Education. The Ministry of Education undertook a multi-year consultation process with a phased approach to implementing the new regulations. In 2015, the Child Care and Early Years Act, or the CCEYA, came into force, which has already meant changes to the kinds of recreation programs that municipal, nonprofit, and private organizations can operate without a license, and we'll cover those in a minute. And as I mentioned, there are also certain regulations that are currently open for public comment, and this webinar will largely deal with those regulations, and they focus on recreation delivery. PRO has been working with a stakeholder group, including Boys and Girls Clubs, municipalities, YMCAs throughout this process, and I'd just like to take a moment to thank everyone who has contributed to the work so far, and especially to thank three individuals, Pam Blanchfield from the City of Toronto, Kim Charteris from YMCA Ontario, and Sandra Morris from Boys and Girls Clubs of Ontario Central Region. First, a bit of history. Until this modernization exercise, there were very broad exemptions for recreation programs. For the most part, all types of recreation programs run by municipalities, for example, were exempt from licensing requirements. Under the old Day Nurseries Act and Ontario Regulation 797, there were authorized recreation providers who could operate programs without a license for kids under the age of 10. You can see here the type of program that this regulation covered. Ontario Regulation 797 defined authorized recreation providers, and this included municipalities, Ontario Camps Association accredited organization, First Nations, etc. But as many of you will know, nonprofit or for-profit organizations had to seek approval by motion of a local municipal council or recreation committee in order to be deemed as an authorized recreation provider. However, we know in today's context that's impractical and has caused a lot of issues over the past year. So the old regulatory framework has helped develop a very responsive recreation delivery system. Recreation providers have been able to respond to community need with high-quality, affordable programs. The sector has worked collaboratively to develop quality standards and training like the High Five Quality Standard and the YMCA Healthy Child Development Framework. And literally hundreds of thousands of families benefit from this system of quality and responsive programs. So don't worry, many of these programs, and in fact probably the majority of these programs, will continue to be available for families. But there are several concerning issues in the current and proposed regulations that may significantly limit the choice that families have and potentially destabilize recreation delivery. So that leads us to today. The CCEYA came into effect in December 2014, and the transition to the new regulations began. Recreation stakeholders were generally pleased to see that recreation was recognized for its vital role that it plays in meeting community need and keeping kids healthy and active. The CCEYA provides for exemptions for certain types of recreation programs and exceptions for others. Just to be clear, exceptions means that while the program does not require a license, it may be subject to regulation and guidelines. And you'll note that there's a change in focus here in exemptions from a provider type, as we had under Ontario Regulation 797, to exemptions and exceptions by program type. So first we'll review the exemptions. Exemptions exist for those programs that have recreation as the primary purpose. And the definition listed here comes directly from the Act. And the examples are what we would maybe consider our core recreation programs, those that are episodic and less frequent, so 8-week sessions, one time per week. No license is required for this type of program as long as the program meets the test of having recreation as primary purpose. And there's a set of criteria listed in regulation that we will be reviewing just very shortly. So some examples of these kinds of programs are weekly swim lessons, sport ball dance, any sport league participation, as long as that organization, providing it is a member of a provincial sport organization, for example, Girl Guides 4-H, programs that take place in church that focus on cultural or religious instruction. So there are also exemptions for recreational camps. Camps that are serving children over the age of 4 do not require a license or any form of accreditation, as long as they operate for no more than 13 weeks per year, do not operate on school days, and do not operate in a person's home. Camps for children under the age of 4 have some very specific restrictions. In the Act itself, it refers to a restriction of 7 hours per week for no more than 72 hours total. However, there are certain other criteria that the Ministry of Education is currently using, and this may be new information to some people, that those programs that are falling under that 7.5 hours per week must have an early childhood educator as a supervisor. They can be no more than 3 hours per day, must be in separate rooms from other programs, and that you're only allowed to have one program like that. And this is causing all sorts of confusion and concern over the way our programs are structured. For instance, if you might have a program that runs Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Sometimes there's some confusion and lack of clarity about what is allowed and what is not. So this is one area that PRO will be seeking written clarity and clarification from the Ministry of Education. So organizations can also provide kindergarten preparation programs when done in collaboration with the school board or offered by a family resource center. And of course, school boards have their own requirements that they would need to have a third party provide those. So that's that written approval. So as I mentioned, there's a little lack of clarity around this that we are seeking clarification currently from the Ministry of Education. So moving on to exceptions. The Act also provides an exemption from licensing for authorized recreational and skill-building programs where the primary purpose is deemed to be care, and it has as a complementary purpose recreation. While they do not require a license, as I mentioned, programs would be required to meet any criteria as prescribed by regulation. So they fall into this category of accepted because really the ministry views them as care. So they fall into that continuum of child care. The Act is quite specific and says that these programs are only accepted if they run for children aged 6 to 12. There are other restrictions as well, which we'll be looking at shortly. So I have the meets any other criteria prescribed by regulation in red because that is part of the current consultation. So 1 year ago, approximately, Ontario Reg 13715 came into effect, and that outlines the factors that shall be considered as may be relevant when ascertaining the primary purpose of a program or service for the purpose of determining exemptions. So this is where we find out how the ministry intends to determine if recreation is the primary purpose or not. So here are the 6 factors that are listed in the regulation. As you can see, they reference duration, frequency, age of the child, program content, type of facility, transportation. They're not specific. And there was little consultation on these 6 factors other than to say that the ministry would be using these kinds of parameters. So this is part of the issue that we're trying to sort out now to figure out how these would be applied to recreation programs. There also exists a transitional regulation. It allows certain 3-hour programs to be exempted from licensing while the new regulations are being created. It basically keeps the status quo for children's programs, for the after-school programs for kids aged 6 to 12, but also recognize Ministry of Tourism, Culture, and Sport funded after-school programs as being exempt from licensing. So this transitional regulation has allowed us to keep operating a large number of programs this year without having additional regulation. So just a quick snapshot, a little overview of where we are at now. Programs that do not require a license and are not subject to further regulation are those episodic recreation and sport type programs and camps that meet the criteria set out in the Child Care and Early Years Act. Programs that do not require a license but are subject to regulation are those programs for children aged 6 to 12 running 5 days a week, 3 hours or less per day. PRO will be creating a chart that we hope will be very helpful for people to help them understand what currently the landscape is for programs under different age groups, say for 3 to 3 years, 11 months, 4 and 5-year-olds, 6 and above, and with some examples. It's taking us some time to put this together because we want to be sure that the information is accurate and reflects exactly how the Ministry of Education would apply the criteria to our programs. So what is proposed for the future and how is it going to work with our current recreation delivery system in Ontario? This is the URL for the regulatory posting. It is open until April 1st, 2016, and there is perhaps a bit of irony in that date, but I won't go into that. The regulation will have an impact on recreation delivery in 3 ways. It specifies a mechanism to determine authorized recreation programs, and thus revising what we currently understand under OREG 797. It specifies how local planning will take place, and we feel this will have a significant impact on recreation delivery. It sets out policies and programming requirements for after-school programs for children aged 6 to 12. There are also some other issues around staff qualifications, program space allocation that we will also be touching on. So there are some issues, as I noted, that stakeholders have raised as concern, and we're going to go through these now. So our first issue are those factors to determine exemptions, those 6 factors that we had a few slides ago. Stakeholders feel that there's a key element that is missing from these criteria for recreation programs. Whether they're 1 hour or 3 hours, there's a fundamentally different purpose and different outcomes for a recreation program as compared with a licensed child care program that is providing care for children on an ongoing basis for very extended periods from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. The definition of recreation itself in the Act seems to lead to a narrow definition that recreation is only physical activity. If you look back, it said recreational arts, culture. It seems to read as if, well, we're considering recreation as only physical activity or sport activities, when recreation should include the many diverse types of activities that are provided in our programs. So if applied from the perspective of licensed care, the factors to determine exemptions can significantly limit recreation providers' ability to offer recreation programs that are highly valued and are currently meeting community needs. There are definitely concerns about more stricter limitations for programs for younger children, for children under the age of 6. So our first recommendation, and this is a draft recommendation. Oops, I think there we go. Sorry, I slipped over 2 slides there. Apologies. So here are some of the reasons why the criteria are problematic. Organizations are already providing quality, developmentally and age-appropriate programs serving hundreds of thousands of families. Municipalities and current authorized recreation providers have worked collaboratively to develop quality program standards that we've already talked about that address risk management, health and safety, and healthy child development within a recreation context. The government has recognized the importance of recreation and providing quality programs. They intentionally, for better or worse, have seen recreation as vital, and therefore, because it's part of a larger framework, I think this is why some of the regulations that they're proposing have come into place and why they're problematic for us. So our first draft recommendation, we are recommending that in this regulatory framework, including the existing regulation 137.15, that it be reviewed with stakeholders and amended so that the criteria used to determine exemptions do not limit recreation providers' ability to respond to community needs and do not have the unintended consequence of limiting choice for families. We would also recommend that there's a very broad consultation process during this, and that the key stakeholders that have been participating at this point, Parks and Recreation Ontario, YMCA, Boys and Girls Clubs, continue to be part of that process. Because we understand that there are many factors in play here, that there are consequences because of the implementation of full-day learning that need to be considered so that we are providing the best options for parents. The second issue, and if you want to follow along in the regulatory posting, I will give some flags along the way. This part of the webinar, we're dealing with Section sections B1 and B2 of the regulatory posting, which are on pages 5 to 7. The proposed regulations state that as of January 1st, 2017, 3-hour daily programs for children aged 4 and 5 will require a license. So that would be an after-school program. Those are currently operating and have been able to operate in certain circumstances. So this could include a program that runs every day, but parents register for each day individually, and it could also include drop-in programs that run Monday to Friday in the same time slot with the same title. So again, it is about the unintended consequence of really limiting choices for family who do not need or cannot afford full-time care and don't have access to subsidy. The children in these programs will require some other options, and many communities don't have the capacity and license in other programs to provide this much needed service, and recreation has been providing that choice all along. So the draft recommendation is that the regulations be revised to allow for authorized recreation programs to run for children aged 4 to 12 when deemed necessary, and that's based on community need. The third issue is the duration of programs for authorized recreation and skill building programs. So the regulation currently states that programs can operate without a license for only 3 consecutive hours per day. As noted, the recreation sector has responded to community need, and this means that recreation programs could not offer before and after school programs for children aged 6 to 12. And for instance, if there are staggered end times for schools that are using an after-school program, and your program has to start at 2:45 for one school and 3:15 for another school, that would mean that your program would be running longer than that, 3 consecutive hours. That is an unintended consequence of that limitation, and we feel very strongly that this is going to cause issues for communities that need to use recreation providers. In lots of cases, there may be the need to have both a licensed option and a recreation program, and that recreation program could not meet community need if it were not able to operate before and after school. So the draft recommendation, in addition to changing the age range, it is recommended that the 3 consecutive hours restriction be removed. Again, as we note, it is really just to meet that community need. Our fourth issue is around the programming requirements. As noted earlier, there are policies and programming requirements that the draft regulations include that would apply to those programs accepted from regulations. And these can be found in Section G3 of the regulatory posting. Stakeholders, I think, as we have heard at PRO, have certainly supported improved quality of programs and that providers be supported in that in providing quality programs. However, a detailed list of the policies may not be the best approach. Organizations need the support to assess the kinds of policies required for their circumstances and support to implement and evaluate those policies. Certainly, many recreation providers already have sophisticated risk management policies and procedures, evaluations that are in place, and we want to ensure that there is alignment and that there is an ease of implementation. So, for example, tourism, culture, and sport funded programs have a set of guidelines and policies that they must meet. So we want to ensure that those guidelines are consistent and that they are in fact, serving to improve quality, and that they are being applied in a way that is supporting recreation delivery. So our recommendation in this area is that the regulations provide an overarching framework for procedures for policy development, implementation, and evaluation that are supported by more detailed guidelines and templates that can help organizations. This is a position that our stakeholder working group has held from the beginning, that regulation should be at a high level and that guidelines that support delivery should be used. The fifth issue is determining quality for authorized recreation skill building programs. You'll remember that I said there was a move away from providing exemptions across provider type to program-specific exemptions. So the issue of how to recognize the breadth of quality recreation providers is addressed in the regulatory posting. As you can see, certain types of organizations are still considered to be sort of accepted, and they can operate those programs without having to be authorized. But other types of organizations, nonprofit organizations, for example, would need to be authorized by the local service system manager. The Consolidated Municipal Service Managers and the District Social Services Administration Boards will take on an additional responsibility regarding authorized recreation programs. The CMSMs and DSABs are, as you may know, already responsible for childcare and fee subsidies. So recreation providers would have contact with these with the CMSMs and DSABs if they were looking for a fee subsidy for eligible programs. So in the proposed regulation, CMSMs and DSABs will determine if a program is authorized based on guidelines yet to be developed. So it is recommended that the guidelines used by the CMSMs and DSABs are developed in consultation with recreation stakeholders and are aligned with industry standards used by a variety of recreation providers, such as municipalities, YMCAs, Boys and Girls Clubs, and other nonprofit providers. Local planning. So the CCEYA recognizes the essential role that CMSMs and DSABs play in planning, managing, and funding local child care and early years programs. As such, they will be directed to conduct local planning. Since recreation is now part of that planning, we definitely want to ensure that recreation is involved and that it is a vital part of the process. I think we can point to many, many examples where recreation has often taken the lead in assessing community need, and there's expertise in providing programs that really do serve the community to the best advantage. So in this way, we are recommending that CMSMs and DSABs must consult with recreation providers in their area when creating local service delivery plans. There are many, many mechanisms that could take place, and a joint planning table would be ideal. We do not yet know how the ministry proposes to support CMSMs in this new role. One of the other issues that we're tackling is the transition time. I think during the last set of regulatory postings, we had issues regarding the timing and the implementation. So these new regulations are set to be published in 2016 and take place between September 2016 and January 2016. We strongly feel that there's a need to avoid more unintended consequences, and that the recreation sector is very large and diverse. We know that planning for recreation guides and program planning takes place 6 to 8 months, if not in advance, if not more than that, and providers need time to plan and budget accordingly, as well as to ensure that there are options for families available should programs no longer be available to run. So the draft recommendation is that the transition time to any new regulation be extended in order to ensure that there are no unintended consequences from proposed regulatory changes, and that providers have time to implement any changes required. So we are just motoring through. I'm really happy. I see a few people typing in questions, so I'm just going to pause for a second, take a quick drink of water if you don't mind. and just quickly look at the other issues. There are issues in the consultation document regarding staff ratios, and then again, these would apply to those programs that are accepted. There's a staff ratio recommendation that also includes a definition of a separate area for programs. We are concerned that the ministry may have a very narrow definition of what a separate area is. For example, if you're running a recreation program that has two separate programs in a gymnasium separated by some form of curtain or other wall, temporary wall, we don't know if they would be considering that a separate area. So we are working on some position statements on that. As well, staff qualifications are problematic both for licensed and unlicensed programs. They are requiring certain types of post-secondary education, and in some cases we would like them to recognize equivalent experience, because there are problems sometimes in some areas finding qualified staff with the proper certifications, but there are plenty of people with multiple years of experience and other kinds of training. So those issues will be addressed as we move forward. And just to remind you, PRO will be circulating a condensed overview of the changes to members and people attending this webinar, so that we can just look at each age group and the impact. So just in conclusion, overall, there is a sector concern that the regulations may lead to fewer options for families for programs, camps, early learning programs, and just general recreation programs. Licensed and subsidized spaces are insufficient in some areas to accommodate families when recreation programs are not available or become unaffordable. Regulations will destabilize recreation delivery and have the unintended consequence of eliminating spaces and services that are community responsive, that are very high quality, and that are affordable. I know I sound a bit like a broken record, but it really is the heart of the issue. So what are our next steps? This webinar will be posted, and as I mentioned, there will be an accompanying document along. The webinar audio as well as the PowerPoint will be posted and circulated. PRO will be circulating a survey. The survey will include the background information as well as position statements that you will be able to support and provide other feedback. There may be options to see what options are going to work best in communities. We will be circulating it as widely as possible. The submission deadline is April 1st, so it's a very quick turnaround. You will be seeing the survey coming your way very early next week, and we're going to ask people to respond very quickly. At April 1st, the advocacy will not stop. We will hopefully be meeting with staff at the Minister's office in order to apprise them of our positions. We will be continuing to work with ministry staff on the policy side in order just to underline all of the unintended consequences. PRO had done some surveying in 2015 at the end of the year about the impact of changes, and we continue to look at that data and share it with the ministry. We will be providing more information sessions to come. I will be providing this information at the PRO Forum. There will be more webinars, and as I said, we're going to have some frequently asked questions and guidelines circulated. There is an FAQ document that the ministry is currently helping us create. We are waiting for them to respond so that we can circulate that. So this is an important slide. I know many of you will have questions pertaining to specific programs that you run. Unfortunately, we are unable to answer those questions. We're not the licensing experts here, and we continue to find out information from our stakeholders. So we really encourage members to contact the Ministry of Education. They may be overwhelmed by the feedback that they hear, and that may be a good thing, but we really can't respond to program-specific questions. So here is their contact information. And if you do have specific issues that you would like to raise with PRO, I would be happy to take emails at any time. And I do try and support providers as much as I can. And what I really like hearing is those examples where communities are facing challenges in delivering programs that are meeting that community need. And we will be seeking information on those that we can include with our submission to government, examples of programs that may not be able to operate, that would be leaving a big hole in certain communities. So in a record time of under 40 minutes, we have completed the webinar, and I really thank you all for your participation. We'll leave the chat box open for a while now because you may have questions. I know we've had a very, very high-level overview today, and I will leave the chat box open so that we can have all of the questions answered and in a timely fashion. So again, my name is Diane English, and I'm with Parks and Recreation Ontario, and I just want to thank everyone for participating today, for providing your comments and feedback, and we look forward to continuing to connect with you in the days and weeks to come.